Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here with the beginning of a video series that's been in the works for a long time, and one that I promised for even longer. Today I'm going to show you how I go about the tone match process for different bands with the AX8. Now, if you own something like the AX8 or especially the AX8, the stuff I'm going to be showing you really isn't even necessary, because you can just take your raw overdrive and raw amp sound and compare it against a finished track and split it, kind of like figures out the difference between the two, and you get a finished guitar sound. So it takes out all the guesswork with cabinets and mic positions, all that good stuff. Say you want to sound like John Petrucci, you can throw on a Mesa Boogie Mark IV lead amp block and then compare against one of his tracks, and it basically does the work for you. However, if you're also an AX8 user, which I know many of you are, then you don't have the privilege of that tone match block, and we'll be waiting on the next generation of hardware, which hopefully will have it. So with that, I'm going to be showing you my process to get as close as I do to some of the bands that I try to make tone matches for. And I've got a lot of comments in the past asking, hey, can you do X guitar player's tone or Y band's tone? And really, I think the biggest prerequisite for this is to have intimate familiarity with the band or guitar player you're trying to emulate as far as their sound goes. Some of the things I've been asked, I could probably get close. You know, it's kind of that 80 for 20 rule, but because we don't have the privilege of tone match, I figure the best way to go about it is to, you know, be listening to these bands for years and already know the kind of stuff you're going after. So with that, I thought a behind the scenes video of how I'm, actually do it. That way you can copy that method will be the most valuable for people going forward. With that said, this is going to be a multi-part behind the scenes series that is going to run quite long. I think this video is going to break the 50-minute mark, which is kind of insane because most YouTube viewers don't have the attention span for 5-minute videos, let alone 50-minute videos. But for those of you that will use this, I hope this will be valuable. Today we're going to start off by showing behind the scenes of how I'm going to try to get Meshuggah sound from Violent Sleep of Reason. And one of the main things about the AX8 tone match process for me is taking gear that isn't necessarily perfect and making it work. For instance, this is a 28 and 5/8 inch scale Agile 8-string with Fishman-Fluence pickups. Meshuggah uses Ibanez guitars with 28 to 29.4 inch scale lengths and passive Lundgren pickups. So don't be discouraged if you don't have the exact guitar with the exact pickups and all the same hardware, because you can still get very close to some of the tricks I'm showing you here. Today we're going to be focusing on the rhythm sound, and then next episode we'll be going into some of the cleans and leads, and also a revisit to see if the rhythm sound still sounds good to me after playing with it for a week or so. So with all that said, let's get started. Okay, so as you might have expected, we're going to start with a completely empty patch. Some people like to take templates and then just tweak from there. For me, no matter which band I'm doing, or even if it's a preset of my own, I just prefer to start from empty. I feel it's always easier to build up from nothing than it is to tweak something that's already there. Now I want to go ahead and add shunts into end. That way we'll get our signal chain started. And then this will basically be our clean guitar signal. If you can't hear that, then there's something wrong, and you probably need to check it out. I'm going to go ahead and put the input gate on intelligent here for this application, and a ratio of 3 is pretty good. We can play with the threshold. Generally, this is around the settings I would start with for more modern guitars. For classic stuff and cleans, if I'm just doing a pure clean preset, then I would almost turn this off or very low if I want to, make sure my sustain is as long as possible, and I want to get some of that vintage feedback and noise. So, but for something so tight as Meshuggah's guitar, we're going to keep that. There's a couple blocks we can go ahead and add, and that is the amp block and the cat block. I'm just going to put them here. We'll probably end up moving them around depending on what we need in between. But no matter what band you're trying to sound like, this is pretty much a sword you can fall on. You're going to need an amp block and a cat block for a guitar tone. It's pretty simple as that. Most people would probably go ahead and throw a drive block here, but for me, I just stick with this before I look into what kind of gear they're using. Because believe it or not all modern heavy metal bands do use overdrive. Sometimes they're just amps are so freaking high gain and tight enough they don't need it. So we're going to stick with that. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Google, and we'll start our research here. So this is a site that I love to reference because they do quite a few really good rig rundowns. So this is from 2016, and there's going to be a little bit that's out of date here, but it'll still give us a good understanding, a good place to start. So I check Premier Guitar for a lot of this stuff. I check their YouTube channel, and there's a couple other sites we'll take a look at as well. As you'll see in a bit, sometimes just something as simple as Google searching whatever artist, pedal board, or a picture of their, amp rundown will pretty much give you the same results if, as long as someone has backstage access and posts the stuff. You have some people like Zach Wild who run an Instagram and post their gear regularly, which is always nice, so you can reference that as well. But a lot of the times you can get this information just by doing this kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and start with this site. This is from their 2016 tour, and there is a video which I've watched several times. I'll be referencing, although I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to play it for you out of, that whole copyright thing. But we got the epic Kent Erickson, amazing guitar tech, guy. He's awesome. We'll go ahead and start with looking at their guitars because this is pretty important. So this is the guitar that Friedrich had been playing live before he went, and it's not official, but it's pretty much known that he's recording his follow-up to Special Defects. So right now Per Nilsson is playing live in his place. But this is the guitar he's been touring with recently, which is a triple humbucker Ibanez Stoneman. This is a 28-inch scale. Absolutely beautiful guitar. Got to see it, like 2 feet in front of me. I would kill to have this thing. But what's important about it is the string gauges, 9 through 72s. Again, the passive Lundgren M8s and the 28-inch scale. He also uses, I didn't get to see it up close. I did see it sit on the rack. Was his other LA Custom Shop Stoneman, which is only a 27-inch scale, but it has a True Temperament fretboard as well as a fine tuning locking system. And then you got, again, your Lundgren M8s with push-pull coil split. So what's important about this is that the guitar that I'm using is a 28-inch scale, 28.625 to be exact. So it's even a little longer, a little closer to their original 29.5-inch scale guitars. So we're pretty good on the scale length, but the pickups I'm using are actives, they're Fishman Fluences, and I like them a lot better than the EMG 808s this thing came stock with, but they're not quite the sound that Meshuggah uses as far as their pickups go. So I'm going to attempt to make this a little bit more passive-like. So for demo purposes, I'm going to go ahead and make sure we're using a 4x12 cabinet. I'm just going to pick something that I usually, 4x12 German, that works. Make sure our high cut, everything is, kind of the same. We got levels good. Everything's good here. Make sure we're not clipping. See what it sounds like. Not bad already. Okay, so this is going to be the first thing in my signal chain because I want to modify the sound of the pickups. And you can do this if you want to EQ your guitar before you go in, like Dimebag did. All this stuff you can put before the amp block, and I would put pretty early in the signal chain. So I'm going to put the compressor block, and you might think, well, aren't most active pickups more compressed than passive pickups? And you are correct, but there's actually a dynamics block here. And what you can do is make this dynamic both positive and negative values. Negative will compress the signal, make the peaks and troughs closer together, which is not what we want. We want to expand the signal, and you can play with these values. In fact, I'm going to put this at about 2. Should have put my volume at 0 there. And I'm going to lower the output just a little bit. And that will basically keep the same tonal characteristics because when you increase or decrease the value on your tone pot, you're actually playing with the frequency content just a little bit. So instead of having to worry about any of that and trying to keep the same tone pot position all the time, I'm just going to keep it wide open and use this here. So let's see if we can make out any difference. I'm not sure how much that's coming through YouTube, but for me, that is a huge difference. So I'm going to actually play with the release a little bit. I'm going to put it down to, I don't know, let's call it 10 milliseconds. You could probably lower this to Okay, that's the smallest release, epic. So we'll keep it there. Keep emphasis on auto and look ahead on 0, see what that does for us. I think that's a pretty good starting value, and we can tweak from there once we get some of the more parts of the signal chain accurate to the way Meshuggah uses it. And this is something that I've not really implemented anywhere else, but oh, that's neat. Of course. Never had that happen, but yet I record, and this is the kind of stuff you put up with. Anyway, I've not used this anywhere else, but this is a trick that I just kind of started using in the past couple of weeks, just to see if I could get active pickup guitars to sound more like passives. And it's not perfect, but it is quite the improvement for this kind of stuff. So let's restart this program and get back on with it. Okay, so back to Premier Guitar. The first thing we're going to focus on in this patch, and this is Friedrich's patch first, and there, one of the things that I just kind of already know from common knowledge is that Friedrich always plays the lead parts, and Morton always plays the rhythm parts. As such, Friedrich generally doesn't have the cleans in his amp or in his presets. He has his split up between a rhythm and a lead, and Morton would have a rhythm and clean if they're going to do something, like in Future Breed Machine or the beginning to Dancers of Discordant System, that sort of thing. That's kind of how they would split it up. So to make the two guitarists patch, I'm basically going to make the same rhythm sound, and then I'm going to diverge from there. Friedrich will have a lead part, and Morton will have the rhythm clean part. But with the rhythm being the same, we can start here. So this was what they were using at the time in 2016, and what I assume was on the album. Reference pictures, I can't see it, but given the tone of the album, I'm like 95% sure it's there. So this was a Mike Fortin, that is, custom clean boost pedal, which they have set to around 3 o'clock. And they didn't really give a whole lot of description at the time, but they said it's just kind of like the Fortin grind pedal, cuts off your low end, boosts the high end. And really what I thought was, okay, so they're trying to replicate the original clean boost they use in the Destroy, Erase, Improve days and Chaos Sphere and all that kind of stuff. What it turned out to be, though, was the prototype for the Fortin 33, which I have. Epic clean boost pedal, probably my favorite overdrive ever made for a few reasons. It's simple, there's no clipping, it's just a straight clean boost with a very particular EQ curve, and you've got this extra jack that you can use to switch channels on your amp, which is awesome. That means when you turn it off, you go to a clean channel with no overdrive, and you are, you leave your cleans unaffected, which is freaking sweet. So with that, we know one of the first things in our signal chain right before the amplifier should be an overdrive pedal of some kind, in this case, a clean boost. And let's look just a little bit more ahead before we go back to AX8. So these were the real amplifiers they were using when I saw them. And this, you probably recognize, is Ola England's signature 120 watt Randall Satan. And these things were absolute baller. They sounded phenomenal. And this is actually the first time I heard them in person. And you can kind of zoom in here. We can probably get a little closer. And you can see the settings. In the video, they show just a little bit a better shot of it if you want to watch. But really, they're only using the rhythm channel here, the high gain stuff. So with the tone controls, and I'm as familiar with them as I am because I have the Randall Thrasher, very similar amp, not quite as high gain and a little bit different voicing, but has a lot of the same controls. So this is Mike Fortin's low gain, high gain stuff. You got the girth and grind. So this is your low gain, your not low gain. I meant to say low and high frequency. So this is your low frequency content. So they've got that bumped up quite a bit, a little past the H on girth. Grind, they have almost to 0, which makes sense because when you're using a clean boost to, boost your mid and treble frequencies in your guitar, you don't want to add too much more in your amp. And if they had that turned off, what you would probably do is crank this, as high as you can go. But in this case, they're trying to actually make the amp sound more vintage, mud it up a little bit so they can cut through it with these clean boosts. And then gain is at about 10 o'clock, 10, 11 on my amp. There's no way I could keep it that low and keep the gain that Meshuggah uses, but this thing, again, is just ridiculous. This here is the sweep control, which you can use to kind of dial in different cabinets. I don't really know if it's like a band pass or a peak or what exactly, or perhaps it's where you actually change the tone stack. There's like a switch that does something very similar on the Thrasher. Whatever the case, they have it set at about 3 o'clock, and this isn't something that'll be actually in the AX8 software. That, you know, there's no sweep control, but we can always edit the tone stack reference frequency and other things to get that in line if we need to. The channel volume is absolutely cranked, and I can tell you from my amp, if you play with that and the master volume there, you're going to rattle your brain. So very high, you know, we're going to want to keep that channel volume up, or in this case, in the AX8, the master volume pretty high. Bass and middle look about 1 to 2 o'clock, and then trebles at 3 o'clock. And these are all going to change depending on the amp we use. For depth and presence, you're at about 1 to 2 o'clock as well, closer to 1. And these are kind of parameters, especially with depth, that the higher you go in volume, the less you have to play with, and keep them closer to noon. So that'll keep us good references for that sound. Now, the big secret here is that while they use these amps live for a few shows, this isn't what they use to record the album, nor is it what they use to play live currently. So this is a snapshot of a behind-the-scenes video, one of them that was posted, I think, on Nuclear Blast's YouTube channel. It kind of showed the process of them recording this album. One of the things that really makes this different from a lot of Meshuggah albums is they recorded live, meaning they used real amplifiers, they played at the same time as each other, so they were tracking bass, guitar, drums, vocals at the same time. And with that came this amp room. And this is a selection of some of the amps they used. And if you can count, you'll know this is a lot of amps. And every guitar was going through this, and they would mix and match different amps depending on the song. So there's actually a couple more in another photo, if I can get to the damn thing. Here we go. So from left to right, we have a modern-looking dual rectifier with the black diamond plate. What looks like a Marshall vintage modern type amp, but I know for a fact this was Mike Fortin modified, so this thing just screams. Here and in the next picture, you can see a Fortin Natos, which is very similar to the Randall Satan, which makes sense why they chose that to tour with early on. And, you know, a little bit different voicing, but Friedrich had played a couple of these at, you know, there's demo videos of him floating around playing those things, so no wonder they chose it. It also has the girth and grind control, so that makes sense. You have a some type of looks like a 50-watt orange, which there is actually it's soloed at the beginning of Into Decay, and it just sounds so terrible. But that's the point. They just kind of had it there for, you know, background noise and kind of just get the as the mixer of the album would say, just dirt and wrongfulness. But it sounds great in the mix. And there's this custom, what's it called? I can't remember to save my life. It's a preamp section that would go in something like a one of those Randall module amps, but I can post it here. This was another one of those just kind of like background noise amps they used. And then we have a Ingle Savage, absolutely killer amplifier, 120 watt as well. And then what looks like here a Framus Cobra, I'm thinking, as well as a Framus Cobra matching cabinet. But the rest of them are Marshall 4x12s. So this answers a couple questions for us. Number one, the kind of mixture of amps they were using. We also know we're going to be limited because the AX8 can only use one amp block at a time. So we're going to have to go with whatever they used on tour, what they felt was most, close to the sound of the album. And then this also tells us that whatever impulse response we're using is going to be a Marshall 4x12 of some kind. And if we mix it with anything else, it'll probably be, kind of more in the background. Now, one more bit of research that throws us for a loop. This is the Meshuggah signature Fortin amp. And basically, this is a single channel 50 watt version of that modified Marshall that you saw in the pictures. Basically made to Friedrich and Morton specifications. We can get that full screen there. So we've got master volume, pull for more gain, because this thing totally probably needs more gain. A presence control, bass, middle, treble. Gain 2 and gain 1 is your low frequency and high frequency. And then you've got channel jumpers between, which is kind of like your high impedance and low impedance. And this thing is just a beast. There's a couple videos on YouTube that showcase it. I would love to get my hands on one of these at some point. I'm just not paying the new price tag for it because I have absolutely no way to justify one of these things. But perhaps in, a few years down the road, if the prices don't go up, I can get my hands on one because they just sound so cool. Since it's a 50 watt, you only got 2 EL34 tubes, which is an interesting departure from their 6L6 and the KT88s that the Randall Satan use, and of course 12 AX7 preamp tubes. So with all that, we basically got to build a patch that sounds kind of like this amp and mirrors the saturation and heaviness of up to like 7 or 8 amps they could have used at the same time, all through a couple at most impulse responses. So we've got our work cut out for us. Back in the Premier Guitar article, there's one more picture of interest that might be able to give us a little bit more direction. So this is the rest of Meshuggah's rack unit. See, there's 3 AX8 XLs. You've got 2 Torpedo Live load boxes, and of course our wireless units, power conditioner, that kind of stuff. But if you can zoom in on here, and the video, you can get a much closer shot, you would see some things that are very, very interesting for this patch in particular. So as their tech explains, what they're doing is for their rhythm sound, they're running the Randall Satan through the load box. So this is, to get, so you don't blow up your amplifier and you can get a direct sound. They're not actually using an impulse response here. They're just running the DI signal into the AX8 and using their built-in impulse responses there. That way they can MIDI switch it, do all the kind of stuff that, with live shows that you want to do. And this is exactly what I was doing in the real amp through the AX8 video I made, where I took the raw output, put it through an AX8, and used the built-in effects and built-in cab lock, that sort of stuff. Now, if you can watch the video, you'll see a close-up shot here that actually tells you what amps they're using. And as their guitar tech explains, on fly-in gigs, they can't take real amp heads. It's past the weight limit. So what they do instead is use the built-in amp models here. And they have amp 1 selected as the Angle Severe 2, and they have amp 2, at least Friedrichs does, of the Rectifier 2 Modern Orange, I believe. And that pretty much tells us what amps we're going to use here. So we'll use the Angle Severe 2, which is the Angle Savage, which makes sense considering that's one of the amps they recorded with. And we'll use the Rectifier 2 for the solo sound. It's also worth pointing out that the text says specifically the amps aren't being used in parallel. The rhythm sound is the Severe and the lead sound is the Rectifier, because even like the clean stuff, the solos, that's all. They weren't using the Randalls or the Fortin 33 pedal at all. They were just using straight Axe effects for that. So with all that in mind, we've got quite our work cut out for us there. But again, we know a couple things here. So we can choose the Angle Severe 2, and we'll go ahead and hit X on XY. And this will be for when we implement scenes and that sort of thing. And luckily I wrote it down. That way I wouldn't forget, if I can find it in my notes, which rectifier that was exactly. So this was the Rectifier 2 Red in vintage mode. And I'm just going to keep everything at noon for right now. That does not have a depth setting, so we'll keep that at 0. Back that down a little bit. Make sure we're at good version, or a good output level there. And with that, so begins the fun. So before we even worry about an overdrive pedal, I'm just going to try to get this dialed in close, just to get a general overall sound of Meshuggah. And this probably doesn't sound too bad as is. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the cabinet impulse response. And because they use so many amplifiers and so many cabinets, I'm going to go ahead and make this stereo. And we're going to do a little bit of panning, and I'm going to try a little bit of delay since you're going to have some phasing and stuff going on. We'll make it 33 just for fun because, 33. And I'm going to throw on proximity. Since this was recorded in a live manner, I want to make sure that we capture all the little nuances as much as we can. I don't know, we'll start out 0.5, that sounds good, 0.5, 0.6, something along those lines, and same for down here. And let's just go hunting for some Marshall 4x12s, and I'm trying to think of some of the ones I usually use for high gain stuff. 145, that one's a good one. That's one of the own hammers, very good. And we'll just try something else different. We can make them the exact same, you know, early on if we want, but these greenbacks generally sound pretty cool, so let's try that. Not too shabby, doesn't sound terribly different yet, but we haven't, you know, ventured too far anywhere else. I think before we go further, we need to get that overdrive pedal tackled. Now, there's a couple things we can do. I made a video where I showed you can get a pretty good Fortin grind and drive effect by going to drive and going to FET boost, which is a fairly flat pedal, and getting rid of the clipping. So you go here, set it to null, you play with the drive and tone and level, and you can get something that is a very good clean boost. You boost your treble, cuts out the bass, you can play with the frequencies, that sort of thing, to get even closer. For this particular instance, though, I actually have another trick up my sleeve. Because we're doing a clean boost only, we can actually go to filter, and we've got quite a few different frequencies to play with, and with that we can actually create the curve, or any curve we want, to match the Fortin 33. There's a couple different ways I can go about this. Because I have the 33, I can just plug it in parallel and, you know, A/B test it until it sounds good. I can do some research to see if anyone's taking it apart. Or, in this case, I am fortunate enough to have contact with another content creator who's done a lot of the work for me. So a few months back, Roman Arsifes of the Arsifes Union, and apologies if I'm butchering that name because I can't speak Russian, reached out to me and asked if he could send me some DIs of his guitar, and I run them through my pedal and send them back to him. And then he would perform frequency analysis of the pedal to see exactly what it's doing, because I posed that question in my review video. What exactly is it doing? I know it's a low cut or a high cut on the low frequencies and probably some boost in the mid somewhere, but is there any other filter, anything else going on to attain this? And he was curious as well. So he sent me his stuff. I sent him, you know, reamped it, sent it some stuff back to him, and he performed some analysis on it and got us these pretty much dead on values. So from 0 decibels at 390 hertz down to about -10 decibels at 130 hertz. So that means that you know, you're going to get a very harsh cut around those lower frequencies, which is what we expected, and we'll be able to model that pretty accurately in the filter. And then we got another slope from 390 to 950 hertz with 7.5 decibels, and that is, again, something I would expect up into those mid-range of the guitar. That's what tube screamers do, is what a lot of overdrives do. That's at around 750 to 1,000 hertz magic range that pushes amplifiers. And then it's going to fall more to 2,200 hertz down to about 5.8 decibels, and more to about 5 decibels at 4,900, and to about, it kind of stays flat to the end because of noise, that kind of stuff. You couldn't tell past 12,000 hertz, but it doesn't really matter on, you know, especially DI signals of guitars don't even really go that high, so it doesn't really matter. Probably do a high cut or something anyway, or a low pass around that point. So we have a really good understanding of what this pedal's doing, and because of that, I'm just going to use the filter instead of an overdrive pedal. Now, you can use something like the parametric EQ and probably get even closer, but just for the sake of simplicity, because this doesn't use like hardly any CPU usage, and we might be using the PEQ in other places down the line, I'm going to keep with this. So because we don't really have all that much going on in the high frequencies, I'm going to go ahead and just start at 15,000 high cut. So that'll take care of that a little bit. I don't know what the pan, why do we have pan? I don't know. I won't let that distract me quite yet. For low cut, let's see. We can do a couple things here. So we can just get rid of a lot of these frequencies. 390 hertz would be around here, and we want that to be flat. We want everything else to duck out. So what we'll probably do is just play with this as we see fit and 200 is generally a good place to start. Depends on what this Q value is. And I'm guessing the second order, fourth order is dependent upon what we're using up here. But that looks pretty close. We can play with it and see if we need more highs or more lows at another time. And then for the other frequency, because it sounds like it's fairly straightforward and flat, I'm going to just go ahead and keep that at 1,000, and we'll try a peaking, and we'll see which fits the curve better. So we got peaking 2 versus peaking 1, and peaking 2 is a bit flatter, so I think I want to keep with that. And he said we go up to 750 decibels at 950 hertz. So let's put that right on the money and see what that does for us. And 7.5 at 950. Okay. And then it sounds like the slope is a bit less extreme than that. So I'm going to play with the Q value till I get a little bit flatter. That seems a bit better. Okay. But we're not 100% done, because this is a overall clean boost, so we're going to have to boost the level a little bit, and to get it to that magical 20 to 22 decibel range is going to depend on, where we're peaking and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to throw it at 10 for now. It's not, addition, it's not quite up to 20, but, that'll depend on our amp gain and that sort of stuff as well anyway. And let's see what that sounds like. So that sounds pretty freaking awesome, and this will be the part where playing with, some of these other parameters might become a little bit more critical. So I think I'm going to turn the attack down a little bit and even turn down the dynamics just a hair. Let's try 1.4, see what that sounds like. Okay, I like that quite a bit. Now let's start tweaking some amp values, and this is going to be one of those things that it's not apples to apples. It's barely even apples to apples of the real amp a lot of the time. But what we do know is that on the Satan, they have these controls about here, here, and here. Will that sound right? Who knows? I also know that the presence and depth of the Savage don't work the same way that the presence and depth work on the Randall amps. On the Randall amps, they're just adding a high frequency or low frequency boost depending on the position, but on the Savage, it drastically changes the voicing depending on where the presence is. So just to give you an idea. So you can go from a low, mid, heavy, guttural guitar sound to solid state garbage if you adjust this too much. So I'm going to keep it, let's just try 3.33. That's, we'll keep with the 33 references as much as we'll let it work. It also sounds like we're a little bit light on depth, so I'm just going to bump that up 1. And, all these may or may not be correct, so we'll just play it by ear. Okay, not too bad. I am going to turn up the input drive and overdrive just a little bit. And the way these are separated, this is kind of like your, I don't know how to describe it. This is your clean input, I guess, and this is your dirty over saturation part. So you can keep the input drive really low and still get the scratchiness out of it, and it's easier to show. So it's kind of critical to keep these two balanced fairly similarly. And I'm just going to put them, I'm going to keep this one just a tad under, yeah, 5.33, perfect. Just having to land on it. This is sounding mid-heavy. Of course, it's going to depend on where your presence is. I'm going to turn that down. And I think I'm also going to keep this here and around the 6.8. That sounds good to me. See what that sounds like. Now we're starting to cook. I'm going to keep all these switches off, bright switch, because we're having just so much boost coming from that clean boost. We really don't need any more high frequency. Fat's going to screw up the entire voicing of the amp. We've already got a mid shift engaged. That's kind of what the difference between Model 2 and Model 1 is. Not going to play with any of this right now, if ever. The preamp, if we really want to get it more in line with the way they have the new amplifiers, we could change this to the 12 AX8, and we can even change the power tube 6550s to EL34s if we really want to see what this sounds like. I don't think these are going to make the biggest difference in the world, so I'm going to leave the preamp tubes alone, but I'm actually going to turn these to 6L6s and just keep them there, considering they use 6L6s and, you know, pretty much everything else they've ever recorded with. You know, that whole dual rectifier sound does revolve around that, but we can go back and tweak these later if we feel the need to. For the cabinets, I'm pretty happy with those, except we had them linked and weren't using the original cabinet I wish to demo, F145, so that's probably partially why I think this tone is missing something. Yeah, that is much better. One aspect of Meshuggah's guitar tone that we've not touched on quite yet is the overall production EQ, where it sits in the mix. And this is a screenshot of a Nail the Mix video with Tu Madsen, the audio engineer for this album, and absolutely amazing audio engineer in general, showing how he's going about EQing and mixing the half dozen or so different guitar amps they're using. So you can see this is each guitarist. So, wrong picture. They've got you can see the Ingle, Torpedo, something coming from the direct box, a DI, rectifier, Marshall, Ingle, something else coming from Torpedo, the C-Watt. That's the amp I meant to talk about earlier. And mixing all of those, just an absolute bear of a job. But basically the way he explains it is a philosophy that I subscribe to personally, is that you don't want to, number one, add frequency content that's not there. You don't want to overproduce your guitars. You don't want to, be throwing maximizers and limiters and all this stuff on it until the final mix, because you're kind of destroying the feel, the pick dynamics, just the human aspect of playing. The second thing is you don't want to throw frequency content on it in an EQ that doesn't exist. Rather, it's a better practice to subtract the frequencies that you don't like. And I highly recommend you watch this video for music production in general. But what he's doing here in this EQ curve is he's taking out those annoying frequencies, those frequencies that he doesn't like. And this is going to be different person to person. But for this particular track, there are some major spikes around the 1800 hertz range, closer to 4,000, so probably 3,200, 3,800 hertz. And some of the other tracks, I remember they were really high up there. But what this allows you to do is when you pinpoint these frequencies and you can take them out in either a parametric EQ or otherwise, then as he says, you can actually boost the overall highs of the guitar sound, because most of the time what happens, if you say, okay, this guitar needs more presence, you turn up the presence, you turn up you know, like a high shelf and an EQ, it's going to be these ice pick frequencies that just poke through and sound terrible. But if you take out some of these frequencies that, you know, contribute to that, then you get a boost in the nice frequencies, but not the garbage frequencies that you don't want. So this isn't going to be just a copy paste job. It doesn't really work for you know, there's no universal method for this. It's just going to depend on what amp you're listening to and you know, everything, what cab you're using, where you want it in the mix, and you don't want to get rid of all these frequencies entirely. So he's got -6 here on this value, about -3 here, about negative, you know, 4.5 there. It just depends. And you're just going to have to play with it. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my curve that I think sits well with this and see what that sounds like. So we're going to add a parametric EQ after the cab block. That's where it would be equivalent of the way he's doing it in Pro Tools. And we could do this with graphic EQ as well, but I want to be able to pinpoint the exact frequencies I want, so this is going to come in a bit more handy. We're good there, and I think we're just going to start by, you know, pinpointing the ones that I think are annoying. So I think I'm just going to throw a huge amount of gain, throw a peaking, and squash that Q, and then I'm going to play some notes and move around until I find some ones that I don't like, that don't sound Meshuggah-like to me. Okay, that's one. That's one I really don't like. 5400, and we'll start with -6. And go on to more bands. These are set up like, I don't like the way they're set up, actually. So I'm just going to manually do it the way I feel like it. Yeah, there's another one. We'll call that 2400, and we'll only do -4.5 there for now, considering that's, you know, a pretty important guitar frequency, but there's definitely a little bit too much going on there. Start with the next one. Kill the Q other way with the Q. Don't want that. There's one. Do 1900. I'll start with -3. We'll see. And we got one more band to do this on. We could double stack EQs. I think I'm going to keep one free though for solos and kind of apply the same method and maybe even a boost overall. There's one of those that I know around the point that Madsen was using. And we'll go -6 on that one. And we've got one pretty close to 3400, so they might even back this one out, change it around a little bit. I think that was supposed to be my 2400. I mistyped. Okay, that looks a little bit more uniform. And then my 1900 is a little close as well. I'll back it down to 18. And it looks a little better. Let's see if it sounds better. It's one of those other points that he emphasizes that I agree. Turn it off. Bypass your effects, whether it be compressors, multiband compressors, limiters, maximizers, especially EQ. Bypass it and see if it sounds better. And if it doesn't, then you've done something wrong. And go back and try it again. To me, that does sound like we've got rid of a lot of the less desirable frequencies. Now, that'll let us play with some of these parameters back here a little bit more if we feel the need to do so, as well as play with different impulse responses, that kind of stuff. I think I want to turn down this high cut to about 12,000 just to give us a little bit more focus. And we can always turn it, you know, play with it as we see fit. When I record guitars, I don't put EQs or anything like that because I just want to take care of it in the mix and do it there. But if you're, you know, trying to get the perfect play along patch and that sort of thing, this is stuff you kind of have to think about. One other thing I'll throw here is a noise gate. This kind of is a brute force method, but you get a little bit of gate here. You get a little bit of noise gate after the amp, and you're pretty much guaranteed to not get a blip of sound going through. So we'll play with that and make sure that nothing comes through this patch that we don't want it to. Okay, and then for some just jamming, I want to add a little bit of a enhancer here. I've been liking this setting a lot. You turn width all the way up on this modern setting, and depth down, and you get just, I don't know, it does sound deeper without killing the high frequencies. That's sounding pretty good. I'm just going to play around with some impulse responses for a second. Most of the time I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't even go to my user spot. I try to do everything in the box here. But this 4x12 metal mix, this is one that they supposedly use this on the Colossus album with their VST plugins. So it's possible this could add some spice. This isn't a Marshall cabinet, but then again, we're trying to emulate multiple amplifiers with one amp block and one cab block. So, you know, maybe it'll help us in the end. Boys and girls, I believe we have struck gold. That sounds freaking awesome. I think this is an Engel cabinet with V30s, which is, again, but it's oversized, but again, not a Marshall 4x12 with G12s at all, but it fits really nicely, I feel like. So you can play with all that as you wish, but for right now, I think that's pretty good. We'll go ahead and save this. We're going to call it Friedrich's Violent Sleep. Hope that fits. Sometimes it'll show that it does and it actually doesn't. So we'll stick with that for now, and I'll let that kind of rattle around the old noggin and see if it, you know, sounds good tomorrow. That's always a good check. Sounds good later. And if it does, we'll move on to some scene creation with leads and lower gain stuff, that sort of stuff. Real quick, I'm going to show one little thing that I know we'll need to do is add a volume block for the lower gain stuff, and whether this would be the 2.5 to 3 range, I'm not sure, but you know, like parts on the introduction of combustion that sound identical to their high gain sound, except there's just less gain. And there's even some parts like they use mid gain and high gain tracks at the same time to get a certain effect. But for this is, I'm kind of going for lower input without having to mess with your volume knob. I think that's working out pretty well. So again, we will keep it there. As you see, that's not going to work, so let's shorten it to Fred's Violent Sleep. This is the kind of stuff I mess with more than the patch itself, just to get something that's kind of a catchy and or punny name. So yeah, I'm going to keep it at that, and we'll be back later to see if it still sounds good, and we'll mess with the lead stuff and clean stuff at that point. Thank you for watching part 1 of this AX8 behind the scenes tone match, and I hope this was valuable for you guys. Please stay tuned. In the next week or so, we'll have part 2 of this up and part 3 thereafter if this does run that long. And we'll probably have a standalone video where I just demo it and do my normal stuff, but I definitely wanted to get this out there before I get on to some more bands, which will probably be a little less complicated. So with that, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.